From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the library's National Book Festival. It's our 16th year. My name is Lorraine Tong, and I work at the Library of Congress in a department that conducts nonpartisan, objective, and confidential research and analysis for Congress. Today, I am privileged to represent the Library of Congress in thanking you for your presence here today and your support for the library and this festival. The library is grateful for the phenomenal support of the co-chairman of the festival, David Rubenstein, and many National Book Festival sponsors who made this event, this and every year possible. We also extend our thanks to AARP for sponsoring this stage and many other library programs. One more thank you to Kristin's parents, because tomorrow is Kristin Hannah's birthday. Happy birthday. Without her parents, she wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't be here and reading her books. So Kristin was born in California, and then now she lives in Washington, the other Washington State, and also Hawaii. She practiced law in Seattle before turning to writing. And fortunately for us, she decided not to write briefs anymore, but rather tell stories. I think she would only take a break if she were nominated to the Supreme Court. We discussed that a little bit earlier. Her words have made us feel, cry, and laugh. There's a real charm and poetic theme throughout her books. As you know, she is an award-winning New York Times best-selling author of 21 novels, including Firefly Lane, Homefront, right, Winter Garden, and The Nightingale, her current book. And some of them have been optioned already for movies. Kristin's books resonate with readers across the country and the world because her books have no borders. They are about ordinary people who are thrust into extraordinary circumstances. In fact, I recently understand and saw some postings on the internet by Reese Witherspoon, Brooke Shields, and Elizabeth Banks, among so many others. In The Nightingale, a story about Vian and Isabelle, two sisters who lived in France under the German occupation during World War II. Kristin wrote, "In love, we find out who we want to be. In war, we find out who we are." It is impossible to express how compelling I found Nightingale. In 2 consecutive weeknights, I was reading until 4 a.m. And then I was sorry I had finished. Kristin will take questions at the end of her presentation, but please be aware that the questions and people in the audience will be filmed for our archives. Finally, thank you for turning off your cell phones. Kristin will favor us with a book signing at 2:30 to 3:30 in the expo section on the lower level. So it is my high honor and a personal pleasure to introduce Kristin Hannah. Kristin.
Okay, so first order of business. You guys are officially the biggest crowd I've ever spoken to. I am terrified. So everybody smile and say hi. Okay. Now I hope my son doesn't call. Okay. Gosh, it's so strange. I can't see any of you. These lights are so bright. I'm sure you've heard that before. So if you think I'm looking dazed, I'm just blind. So obviously it's a real honor to be here. It's exciting to be in Washington, D.C. at this time of year and on this special weekend, and I thank you so much for coming to see me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about sort of my journey and how I came to be standing here, and then yes, I would love to, answer any questions from any of you that you would like. And frankly, I'm really interested in the questions that you would have asked if we weren't filming, but I guess I don't get that. So I'm not one of those people who always thought that they would be a writer. In fact, I would have said that writing was a job for dreamers, and I'm not much of a dreamer. The way it sort of came to me was when I was in my third year of law school. I was, I don't know, maybe 24 years old. I don't know how old I was then, young. My mother was dying of breast cancer. And so every day after class, I would, go hang out in her hospital room. And I'm sure a lot of you have been in these situations. And you know that there are just a lot of things that you don't want to talk about or you aren't ready to talk about. And I was there one day, and because I was young and because I was in school, I was complaining about my classes. I had signed up for a corporate tax, which for a girl who can't add is a very bad idea. And I was complaining to my mother that I was not doing well in class. And she said, well, don't worry, you're going to be a writer anyway. And of course, my dad's in the back going, we just got her into law school, and my thought is somebody needs to check her morphine drip because this makes no sense at all. I had never written a word of fiction. But I think, I didn't want to think about at that point all of the heaviness that was coming, that she wouldn't be at my wedding, that she wouldn't be there when I had my first child, that we didn't have a life together. And so she said, I think we should write a book together. And I jumped on this opportunity. I said, definitely, let's do that. So being mother and daughter, we immediately locked into battle about what kind of book we should write. I wanted to write horror, and she wanted to write historical romance. So now today you could do those together, but not so much in the late 80s. And so, we kind of battled, and ultimately my mom said, look, I'm sick, I win. We're writing historical romance. And so I said, okay. So this was, the pre-internet era. So that meant going to the library every single day, standing in the dusty stacks of Sisalo at the University of Washington, and just Xeroxing pages and pages and pages of material. And I would bring all of my material back to her hospital room, and we would talk about, we could spend a whole day on what did her dress look like, what did her shoes look like, and just collected all this research, plotted this book, which, by the way, we thought was a revolutionary idea, about a woman who dresses as a cabin boy and sneaks onto a pirate ship. And so we did all this research, and I actually, in 1986, I wrote my very first words of fiction. I wrote chapter 1, wrote a scene, and I hadn't even finished the scene when I got the call from my dad saying, you need to come to the hospital. So I was able to sort of whisper in my mother's ear, I started. But she was never able to read anything, unfortunately. And so, after she passed away, I really had no interest in being a writer. I was a lawyer. And so I finished law school and, went back with ordinary life, packed up everything into this box, and put it into my closet. And several years later, when I got pregnant with my son, I went into labor at 14 weeks. And that's when I realized I wasn't going to have an ordinary pregnancy. And I knew, that I wasn't going to be able to have any more kids, and I would be very lucky to keep the one I had. And I was in bed for the entire pregnancy. So this was 87, I guess. So, of course, all my girlfriends are working. My husband's working. There is no good daytime TV. For those of you old enough to remember, Erica Kane was bedridden with Bianca at the exact same time. Bianca's now like 60. But so I tried watching all my children, and Erica was just not having the same bedridden pregnancy that I was. So I turned off the TV. And then I tried The Price is Right. But when you start yelling out refrigerator prices to an empty room, you know that you need to do something fast. And I think at some point in there, my husband sort of poked his head in the room and said, well, what about that book that you and Sharon were going to write? And I thought, oh, that's right, the book we were going to write. So I pulled down this box, and here's this gift from my mom of all of this research and everything that you need to write a book. And I thought, how hard can it be? I can do this. I've got like 7 months. And, so I learned to boot up a computer, and I got out all these things, and I started writing. And you know what? It wasn't hard. In fact, I was so talented, like right from the start, that I didn't need to edit. I didn't need to change a word. It just came out perfectly the first time. So I wrote this entire historical romance novel, unedited, unchanged, in one pass. And then I thought, okay, what lucky agent should I send this to? And I did all my lawyer research, and I sent it off. And I sent it off, I think, about a week before I had my son. And then I started dreaming of book tours and how I would handle multiple offers from publishers and, waiting for all of that stuff. And ultimately, I heard back from the agent, and she said, you may have talent. Frankly, how could I tell? And I thought, wait a minute, it's going to be hard. I didn't, I really, honestly, I was young and I didn't understand. I had made the decision to be a writer. I had written a book. That seemed like what was necessary. And that was when I really understood that writing was unlike anything else I had undertaken in my life. And that I would have to sort of embrace the concept of effort and failure and uncertainty. And I would have to try to learn something that you almost have to learn internally. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to give myself 5 years. I'm going to try to do this. I mean, I can always go back to the law if I have to. And so I undertook sort of this journey of beginning to write. Because I had a young son, I couldn't go take a lot of classes. I couldn't do a lot of things. So I had to, do it sort of as best I could. And one of the first things I did was I went to a conference, not unlike this, it was smaller than this, but it was some authors that were speaking about their work. I remember walking into the room, there was, maybe 100 people in there. And what I remember was they were so old. They were at least 40. And I thought, I just don't belong here. I don't know what to do. And so I did what I always do, which is race to the restroom to, collect myself. I was about 29 at this point. And there was another woman standing in there who was my same age, who was also hiding out from the old people at the conference. And so, and we still don't know how it happened, but we decided to start critiquing each other. So we said, we traded books. I read hers, and I went, oh, man, you are so talented. And she read me, you too. And so we just started, working. And she was a TV news producer. I was a lawyer, so we had this really strong work ethic. And we just never took no. We never gave up. My dad, kept thinking, okay, so you're still writing. I thought macrame would be next, and then paint by numbers, but we just sort of kept working at it. And I was fortunate enough to sell my first book when my son was 2. And so I just kind of, moved into this wonderful, wonderful job, which was a novelist and an at-home mom who was able to go to every, field trip, party, everything, until my son said, for the love of God, stop coming to school. I can't stand it anymore. And in what has become a pattern for me, I seem to have about a 6 or 7 year attention span. And so I wrote romances for about 6 years, and then I started to feel constrained. I started to feel like I wanted to tell different stories. I wanted to tell them in a different way. I wanted to focus on prose and relationships of all kinds. And so I said to my agent, I'm going to write a hardcover novel. And she said, oh no, that doesn't happen. You can't go from romance, And so I said, yeah, I think I can. And I wrote my first hardcover, what they now call women's fiction novel, in about 1998 or something, I think. And did that for a long time, about 6 years actually. Loved it, had a great time. And about 6 years after that, I started to feel that I had this story to tell. But I wasn't exactly sure what it was. I just knew it was a story about my generation, about the girls, women of the 70s and 80s coming of age, and about friendship. What I didn't realize was that I had come to the point where it was finally time to look at my mom's life and to try to understand her. And I think anyone who's lost a mother early, you know that you spend a life trying to know her anyway. And what I did was I wrote a book called Firefly Lane. It was kind of a game changer for me, and it was actually about breast cancer and about friendship. It was sort of very autobiographical in a lot of ways. What I didn't realize was that I was exactly the age my mother was when she was diagnosed when I began it. And when I ended it, I was exactly the age she was when she passed away. And so I sort of feel in retrospect like she was guiding me through that process. And Firefly Lane really changed the course of my career. That was really the first big, epic commercial novel. And it is really the precursor to the Nightingale. And I think it's the book that allowed me to be standing here, having written the Nightingale. The way the Nightingale started was about 8 years ago, I think. I was writing a book called Winter Garden, set in World War II Russia. And I came across the story of a young Belgian woman named André Dujon, who at 19 started one of the early escape routes out of Nazi-occupied France. And obviously I couldn't use this in Winter Garden, but I was fascinated by this story. And I was not only fascinated by it, I started to, I guess I kind of have a pet peeve about women's lost history. And I found myself very frustrated that with all that I read, I hadn't read this story. I hadn't read about, this heroic woman or women like her. So I sort of kept reading. And that led me to the women of the French Resistance, the women who were couriers and spies and helped downed airmen get out and did all these amazing, remarkable things, courageous acts. And then on to women who hid Jewish children or helped Jewish children and Jewish families get out of France. And by this time I thought this was an epic story. I was absolutely blown away by it. And I thought, please, somebody write this book. This is the book I want to read. And so I waited for somebody else to write the book. And I don't know why, but nobody did. And time passed, and I kept waiting, and I kept reading. But I thought, I'm not writing it. This is a huge, important subject. And I'm not a historian. I'm a writer, and I was actually afraid that I couldn't do justice to this story. But finally, I really sort of came to the point where I felt that this story was so important and needed to be told so much that I thought, okay, I'm diving in. I'm going to give it a try. Because I was so amazed by the risk these women had taken and the way they had sort of put their children's lives at risk, their lives at risk. And I was consumed by the question of, what would I do? When would I, as a woman and as a mother, risk my son's life to save a stranger? And I think that, part of the reason that the book has resonated so much with people in the last couple of years is that we don't have enough out there about female heroism and, the amazing things that women have done throughout history to change the course of history, sometimes in quiet ways and sometimes in remarkable ways. And I think this is just one of those stories that resonates with people. And we live in a very dangerous, intolerant world right now. And I believe that the lessons of history are more important than ever. And so I'm really happy to see people embracing this book. And I guess I would just say, sort of before I take some questions, I'm pretty sure that my mother is sitting somewhere with a martini and an Eve cigarette and probably a red pen and, telling the people around her how proud she is that I have finally gotten here. And I think that's because I finally understand now that I'm older than she ever was, that this dream of being a writer was hers. And she, never got to get there because she had her children so young and it was such a different time. So I really feel like it's us together on this journey. And I think she would have really liked this book. So that's it. So who's the brave first questioner? Let's see. Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to know which sister in the Nightingale you felt you related most to and why.
Well, that's pretty easy. For me, I am Vian because she's a mother and because motherhood is really, sort of the bedrock of who she is. And to me, that idea of the bravery it takes when you're risking a life beyond your own, your child. To me, she's much more the heroic figure than Isabel is, because Isabel is young and frivolous, and she risks her own life in an almost thoughtless way, whereas a mother, doesn't have that opportunity. And so that's who I identify with and why. Anybody else?
Is the writer that you made friends with in the bathroom anyone we would know?
Yes, her name is Megan Chance, and she is still published. She's written about 16 novels. She writes historical and young adult fiction. And we still critique each other. We still, have getaway editorial weekends where we do much editing and some margarita drinking.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Love The Nightingale, one of those books I gave as a gift to a number of girlfriends. I guess I wasn't familiar with your story at all or how you came to writing, and to me, it's just very poignant story. Is that a book you've thought of writing? And if yes or no, what are you thinking of next?
It's funny because one of the things that I hear most, about all of my books is, oh, I read it on a train, I was sobbing, I was on an airplane, they gave me CPR. And they generally don't seem sad to me going in. Taking on my mom head on, I think I'm not quite ready for that yet. Maybe at some point. She appears in every single book at some point in some way, the way that we writers mine our families and friends for, storylines, characters, that sort of thing. And I do every year, I guess, that I get older, that I live more, feel more like her. But no, I don't see a book in there yet. I don't think my sister could take it. She'd kill me. And she gets mad at me often enough, let me tell you, with books. And what's next? I'm working on, I guess I'm going to call it a coming-of-age novel about a girl growing up in a very dysfunctional family in a very unusual time period. But The Nightingale's been a little tough to follow, so it's taken me a while.
Hi, I
Hi.
just wanted to let you know how much I love The Nightingale. I thought it was one of the most intricate and complicated books I've ever read, and I was wondering how long did it take you to do the research, and how long was the writing process?
Well, thank you very much. Like I said, there was years of sort of generalized research and getting information and hoping someone else would write it. That took up a lot of time. And probably 8 months of solid research, daily research, where I'm reading, 6 to 8, 10 books a week, or, doing that sort of thing. And then I continued having to research as I wrote. It took about, it was a 2.5-year period altogether. And this was the only book I've ever written, which I couldn't really write a paragraph without going to research first. I didn't know France, I didn't know the era, I didn't know anything. So if I wanted to tell you what the sky looked like, what the plant was, I had to go to research. So it was a lot of stop and go. And what I essentially did with this book was I wrote a historical draft that was just the timeline, all the scenes in place, and then I really tried to create living, breathing characters to move through that, because I couldn't do it all at once.
So this question is building more upon what you just said about how you wrote this book, but you've written a lot of different types of books throughout your tenure as an author. Could you talk about your writing style? Like, how do you go about it, and like, when do you write, that sort of a thing?
So the writing process question. In the early days, when the books were more straightforward, I was very analytical. I did outlines, I did character biographies, I did scene lists, and then I wrote the book as I envisioned it. But at some point along the way, somewhere between Mystic Lake and Firefly Lane, when I got to the big books, that no longer worked for me. I ended up going wrong so often that now what I do, it's an unwieldy process, and if anyone has a new one, I am looking for a new process. Please, give it to me. I come up with a question or an issue. There's one thing that interests me enough to spend 2 years of my life exploring. And I write draft after draft after draft, trying to find the point. For example, The Nightingale, the first 3 drafts, there was only Isabel. And I thought the story's not big enough, but I was nervous about opening it up to that second storyline, but I ultimately did. And there was a draft where they were twins. I mean, I write all kinds of different drafts trying to get to the core of what I have to say. And tragically, I don't know what that is when I start. I have to discover it along the way. And in terms of timing, I write from about 8 to 4 most days. And then I usually take at least a month off a year to just read other people on the beach.
Well, I'm another admirer. It was a wonderful book. And I'm wondering if you actually went to France. The descriptions were so wonderful of the countryside and of the villages, and I'm just wondering if you went to the country to walk around and see.
You know, sadly, I thought I should. And it's interesting because, I've written a lot of books, and I've written books set in other places that I hadn't been. And even World War II Russia, I never felt that I had to go someplace to understand it and to describe it. But there was something special about France. Perhaps it is that almost everyone or a lot of people have been there or, know the era. And there's so many people who read World War II. And I just had a very difficult time picturing it in my head with all the research. So I wrote the first draft, and then I went to France and allowed that to, inform from there on. And it did make, I think, a really big difference. I loved it, too. It was fun. I think I'll set a book in Italy.
Also beautiful. Also, as an attorney and a frustrated writer who came to the enlightenment that it's very different setting out to write fiction. And so, after so many years of successful writing, what tip or tips would you have?
The thing about writing is it's a journey of hope. It's a journey of the heart. And you just simply have to undertake it without knowing if you're any good or without knowing if you'll ever be any good. But you don't quit. I often say to people when I give classes, you really only fail when you quit. So I guess what I would say is read, and write. And don't be afraid to write the bizarre thing, the different thing, the thing that nobody else is writing. Just write what it is you have to say. The great thing about writing is, ultimately, in my opinion, it's about what you have to say. And the older we get, the more we have to say. And the more we know who we are. So it's this great thing where it's never too late to start. You always can begin.
Our book club read The Nightingale this summer, and everyone loved it, hands down. My question, loved the two sisters, but was about the captain that stayed with Viviane. Did you find it challenging to write about a Nazi who had a heart and that was sensitive in a way that we haven't really read about before?
Yes. The easy answer is that was very challenging, and it was something that gave me a lot of pause, and I gave a lot of thought to how I wanted to do this. But the bottom line was my goal in writing The Nightingale, and what I thought, the reason that I finally jumped in and said, okay, I'm going to write this story, was because what I think my skill set is as a writer is emotional impact. My job is to make you actually feel it, not just read the words, not just understand what's going on, but actually feel it. And the idea of the bad Nazi was so easy to do, and it felt like it had been done so many times. And so I wanted to explore something, a man with a little bit more shading than that, and sort of imply that that he was caught up in this in the same way that the sisters were, and that just humanize him, I guess, is the best answer. And actually, I'm really glad that I did that. I think it actually, gave a resonance to the book. And I'm glad your book club liked it. Thanks for picking it.
Hi. I'm in a book group also, and the first book of yours that we chose is In the Winter Garden, which is the first book of yours I ever read. I really loved it, and then I listened to it on tape, and tears going down my face as I'm driving. So, and it really resonated with me, the whole siege and eating wallpaper paste and everything. I still think about it. So I wanted to ask you, how did you do research for that? How did you find out about these things? Did it really happen? And did you go to Russia?
No, I didn't go to Russia. I would still like to. She's asking about Winter Garden, if you can't hear back there, and how I did the research. It was interesting, having done now 2 World War II books about women trying to survive in difficult times. In the French research, there's a lot of research about the women who did the cool stuff, like the couriers, the spies, the downed airmen over the Pyrenees, or, those routes. There's a lot of really good memoir material about that. About the women who saved Jewish children, very little. And about the women who survived the siege of Leningrad, very little, because Stalin kept a lid on it for so long. So a lot of those stories are, coming out now. But it was really, trying to find the few memoirs that existed, and, try to talk to survivors, but it was very difficult, in World War II Russia. But that was the book that made me believe that Nightingale was possible. So I have a very warm feeling for that book still. I think, I'm done? Okay. Oh, one more. Okay, last question.
I also have a question about Winter Garden. What gave you the idea to go into that specific topic?
Well, for any of you who have seen The Descendants, which seems like a non sequitur, but there's a little bar in Kauai called the Tahiti Nui. It's been there since the 60s, and that's where it was in the movie. I was sitting with a girlfriend in there having a Mai Tai, everybody's shoulder to shoulder. And I was saying to my girlfriend, this was right after Firefly Lane, I said, I want to write a book about how amazing we women are to protect our kids, how we can move a truck, to save their lives. And my girlfriend says, yeah, well, good luck with that. And the guy sitting next to me says, well, if you're interested in strong women, you should check the Siege of Leningrad, World War II. And my first thought was, how long have you been listening to us? And what have we been talking about? But it turns out he was a pilot, and he just sent me to World War II Russia. And when I found the story of the Siege of Leningrad, my heart was so broken. And again, it's a lost story. It became, they called it a city of women because the men were all gone, and, they were starving in there. And again, I just wanted this story told because I thought it was amazing. So, thank you. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.